So now that we've done chemistry with food, if you will, let's switch over to actually using a reaction. So in this reaction, 3 moles of calcium chloride react with 2 moles of sodium phosphate to produce 1 mole of calcium phosphate and 6 moles of sodium chloride molecules. So for number 10, it says, what if you've got 9 moles of calcium chloride? It's always a good idea to start by writing what you've got. It wants you to figure out how many moles of calcium phosphate can you produce. Well, for every 3 moles of calcium chloride, you only make 1 mole of calcium phosphate. So it's going to cut it down by 1/3. So we could do it in our head, of course. Oops, I wanted to add moles in here. For every 3 moles of calcium chloride, you produce 1 mole of calcium phosphate. You can see how important balancing reactions was now. So if I multiply across and divide by the bottom, I get my answer. 3 moles of calcium phosphate are produced from those 9 moles of the calcium chloride. My moles cancel out of calcium chloride. Number 11, what if you've got 10 moles of calcium phosphate that you need to make? How much sodium phosphate are you going to need? Well, for every 1 mole of calcium phosphate, you need twice as much sodium phosphate. So let's write that out. For every 2 moles of calcium phosphate, you need double the amount. Oops, I did this wrong. For every 1 mole of calcium phosphate, you need 2 moles of sodium phosphate. And again, that's from the numbers out front. There's no number in front of the calcium phosphate, which means that it's a 1. Okay, so this is going to be 10 times 2 divided by 1. You need 20 moles of sodium phosphate to produce 10 moles of calcium phosphate. Okay, what if now we need some grams too? Here's a different reaction. We've got 1 mole of calcium iodide, 1 mole of sodium oxalate is the name of that polyatomic ion. That makes 1 mole of calcium oxalate and 2 moles of sodium iodide. So they've got a little table here helping us out, saying that 294 grams of calcium iodide are needed to make 128 grams of the calcium oxalate. So we're talking about that's how much 1 mole of calcium iodide weighs. So that's been added up for you. So let's answer the questions that are involved here. Number 12, how many moles of sodium oxalate are needed to react with every 1 mole of calcium iodide? Well, if you just look at the numbers out front, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So the answer would be 1 mole of sodium oxalate. Explain why the mass of these reactants are not equal. So it's 1 mole of each of these, and look, the calcium iodide is 294 grams, and the 1 mole of sodium oxalate only weighs 134 grams. So this is because the molar masses are different. And that's because calcium iodide is bigger. For number 14, why do you produce more moles of sodium iodide, double in fact, than calcium oxalate? So if we look up here, there's twice as many sodium iodides as the number of moles of calcium oxalate. And the reason is because in the reactants, there are 2 iodines and 2 sodiums. So we can say the reactants have 2 sodiums and 2 iodines. So double. Then there's a table and it says it wants you to determine how much of each reactant is needed to make a kidney stone, because that's what this solid actually is, that weighs 12.8 grams. Fill in the following table. Well, what's nice about this table is we have the amount for 1 mole of everything and 2 moles of the sodium iodide. So if we need to make something that's 12.8 grams, that's 1/10. So we need to make 0.1 moles of that calcium oxalate. So everything is 1/10. 0.1 moles and 1/10 would be 29.4 grams. I'm moving the decimal back one. 13.4 grams is 0.1 moles of the sodium oxalate. And for the last one, 29.8 grams, and that is 0.2 moles. So how much does 1 mole of calcium oxalate weigh? According to the table, 128 grams. If you have 12.8 grams of calcium oxalate, that would only be 0.1 moles. That's 1/10, because 12.8 out of 128 is 1/10, or 0.1. And the last one, how many grams of the sodium oxalate do you need to make 12.8 grams of the calcium oxalate? So let's look at our little chart. According to our chart, we need 13.4 grams of sodium oxalate. All right, and that's what you missed if you missed this lesson